If you haven't already, click subscribe to never miss another scary story. If you are subscribed, click the notification bell, and click that like button too. Thank you. Have you ever heard of the Manor House Motel? It was purchased and run by a man named Gerald Foos for one very twisted reason. To watch people, well, going at it, if you catch my drift. He claimed it was for research. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Motels are inherently creepy, especially given how many of them lack upkeep and look more like well-fashioned haunted houses. But what real-life nightmares happen at these bed-bug paradises? Well, these allegedly true scary stories will show you. If you want to be in a future video, I'm looking for creepy stories from Toys R Us. If you've got one, send it to me at darknessprevails.org/submit. Now then, you'd better check in, because I just can't wait to watch you have a great evening. Number 1. Motel Creeper, submitted by LANCOLIER. In the late 90s, my father and I roamed around the Midwest from motel to motel. My mother had completely disappeared from our lives after having lied about paying rent, then ditching us overnight. After that, we ended up a little homeless for a couple of years. It sounds bad, but in reality, some of the best moments of my life were spent with my father while we roamed around like father-daughter nomads. Well, except for this one very life-scarring occasion. I can't remember if it was a Motel 6 or a Super 8. It was one of the two. We stayed at one after a long day of driving through what seemed like nothingness, just field after field. Despite it being the middle of the week, we saw hardly anyone on the road. It was strange. From the moment we entered that county, it had such an eerie and lonely vibe. It was somewhere in Nebraska, and I recall it was the start of spring, so still pretty cold. Anyway, we stopped at this motel at around 7 p.m. It was in the middle of a small town that was basically just a couple of gas stations, a diner, and a bank. The place had 2 other cars in the parking lot, and looked like it was ready to cave in on itself at any moment. My father and I were so tired though, and we quickly got inside to be checked in. That was when we met the clerk. The sight of him made me feel uncomfortable. Huge glasses, super thin frame, forward-leaning posture, and a burn mark on the left side of his face. He was a creepy-looking guy, but considering he weighed probably a little more than a sack of potatoes, he didn't seem too intimidating. I avoided eye contact with him after he saw me staring, but after looking away, I could still very much feel those spectacled eyes boring into me. We got our keycard and found our room in Second's flat. Once inside, I took a shower and my dad and I got to bed. I remember falling asleep only a few moments after hitting the mattress. I slept pretty hard. Until a certain sound woke me right up. I sat straight up in the bed, looking toward the door. It was still completely shut, meaning it was locked. Did I just have a nightmare? I thought. Why had I woke up so suddenly in a panic like that? Seeking comfort, I glanced at my dad, who was snoring heavily from his bed. I sighed. Everything was normal. At least, I thought that, until I saw the closet door move. It was an extremely small, barely there closet, not one with a typical swinging open door. Instead, it had 2 folding doors, which made it even more odd that it had just suddenly moved. Air pressure might cause a door to pivot, but it doesn't make a folding door fold. In the darkness of the room, I stared into the small crack between the 2 folding doors, but all I saw was blackness staring back. After several moments, I convinced myself that I was just seeing things. I had just woke up after all, and I was still exhausted. But then I heard the breathing. Loud, slow, and sloppy breathing, as if someone was having trouble keeping their breath quiet. This horrified me so much, as it was coming from that closet. I turned to my dad, took in a deep breath, and was ready to scream when a cold, bony, clammy hand covered my mouth from behind. "Hush now," a voice said behind me. "What am I to do if you woke up your dad?" Tears flowed out of my eyes and fell over his hand. What was he going to do? And what did he mean? Was he threatening both of us if I tried to scream? I felt him kiss me on the top of my head. Then he leaned down to whisper in my ear. "No one has to know. It'll be our little secret. What do you say?" I could barely breathe, let alone respond to his question in any way, shape, or form. I continued to silently and unblinkingly cry. Suddenly, I felt a tug at the top of my head. At the same time, I heard the sound of a snip, like metal shears from a barber shop. Being with my father for so long, that's where we got our haircuts, despite being a girl. A few seconds afterwards, he used his other hand and wrapped it around the back of my neck, then uncovered my mouth. And despite being free to scream, I didn't. I stayed petrified, frozen to my spot on the bed. Because now I knew he had scissors, my dad was unconscious, and I was too small to protect myself. If I did scream, I thought that would be the end of both of us. A few moments later, he let go of the back of my neck. Then I heard a slight wooden scraping sound. Then everything fell silent. I didn't move for a very long time. It took me maybe an hour and a half to gather enough courage to turn around. And when I did, I saw the folding doors of the closet. They were now completely shut. Every part of me wanted to get up and open the closet door to see who or what that was. But I still couldn't bear to move, not from that spot. So I sat there staring at the closet until morning. My dad got out of bed and immediately made his way to the closet, probably to slip on his boots because he hated walking on the floors with bare feet. I nearly screamed when he unfolded those doors, but when I saw inside, there was no one. It was just a dream. It was just a terrifyingly vivid nightmare. I sighed and ran to hug my father. He was confused. He just didn't understand how relieved I was. We didn't stay there another night, as we had to keep going. My dad needed to get to Oklahoma before the end of the day, so we got ready to go, then went to the checkout desk to give the key back. I was tired, rubbing my eyes and not really paying any attention. I was wondering what I could do on the long ride to pass the time, while my dad talked to the clerk to get everything settled. That's when I heard my dad say, "You, look different." In the middle of a stretch, I looked up to see what he was talking about. When I saw the clerk, the tears began to fall once more. Hanging behind his left ear was a tuft of hair that had a texture, color, and quality different from the rest of his. And it was very familiar, because it was my hair. He smiled back at my dad and simply answered, "Well, it's been a long night." And then we left. We left as I struggled to find a way to regain my composure. We left before I could figure out how to tell my father that the terrifyingly creepy man at the front desk had snuck in our room at night, cut my hair, and somehow disappeared into the closet. But I simply couldn't. I couldn't find it in myself to say anything that day. I never did tell my father. The confusion and trauma from that experience was overpowering. I stopped thinking about it a long time ago, because when it does come up in my mind, I can't help but wonder, how did he escape into the closet? Where did he go? why me? So, if you ever find yourself at a strange motel in a small town in the middle of Nebraska, if you stay in a room with 2 beds and some folding double doors for a closet, I sincerely suggest you find another place to stay for the evening. Number 2. Creeper at the CRUSTY Motel. Submitted by TACOCAT. A handful of years ago, my family and I were going on a road trip. I was young at the time. I don't remember where we were going, but I do know it was Eastern USA. We were trying to save money, so one night when my parents were struggling to stay awake while driving, we stopped at this old run-down CRUSTY motel. When we got a room and walked into it, it was uncleaned and had no bedding at all. No furniture either, besides an old TV and a king-sized bed. Luckily though, we kids had brought our blankets and pillows in the car. I've always been a light sleeper, so the tiniest things wake me up, especially when I'm sleeping somewhere that I'm unfamiliar with. That night, we closed the curtains, made our makeshift sleeping bags, then went to bed. A few hours later, there was a sound at the window, which woke me up from my light slumber. I got scared easily, so I was already on edge. I looked around me, and I see the silhouette of a man through our curtains. My little kid self had no idea what to do, so I hid my head and prayed he would go away. I ended up falling asleep once more. Another hour or so later, I woke up from a bad dream and looked over to the window. The same silhouette was still there, but now closer to the left where the door was. Somehow I found it in me to get up, crawl to the window, and peek through the curtains. I wish I'd never done that. There was a man's face just on the other side. He was staring straight at me, smiling and waving. He had been looking in on us for hours, just waiting. He had the biggest Joker smile you could imagine, and evil in his eyes. His hand reached out for the doorknob as I watched in horror. Right as he grasped it, I jumped onto the bed, away from the window, and I woke up my dad. I told him there was a bad man at the window, that he was trying to get inside. My dad does not take this kind of thing lightly, so he sprung up and ran out the door, holding my brother's Disney's car's umbrella as a weapon. But the man was gone. I'm in my mid-teens now, and my family has never stayed in a motel since, because a scare like that is enough to last a lifetime. Number 3. I got into a car with a stranger, twice. Submitted by Artello91. Let me start off by saying you should never get into a car with a stranger. And yes, it was dumb of me to do so, but when you're young and impressionable, like I was, the threat almost seemed non-existent. I was 16 and wasn't a really good-looking girl. Never ever got hit on by boys, and my chubby features didn't help me out. I also seemed to make friends with older people, as a lot of my peers were into fashion, music, and recreational activities. Stuff I just wasn't into. As such, I figured my chances of becoming such a victim of anything predatory, for me anyway, was just something in the movies. I always felt safe. I was alone downtown like I've been many times before, when this man in his 60s asked me about the Beatles t-shirt I was wearing. Do you like the band? Or do you think that shirt just looked cool? I laughed and explained that they were my favorite band. He and I talked for a moment about the band, and then he starts to explain to me that he is just visiting for a couple of days. Then he asked if I knew where to get a good cup of coffee. I was a coffee junkie myself, and I knew a place only a few blocks away from there. I then offered to take him there. When we arrived, he offered to buy me a cup of coffee, just to talk to him for a while. He said I seemed like a very nice girl, and he thought it was refreshing to see someone as young as me have such an interesting outlook on everything. At the time, I didn't find any harm in the invitation and agreed to stay and share a cup of coffee with him. After I had my first cup of coffee, I noticed it was getting pretty late outside. The curfew was 11 p.m., and the buses stopped running around 10 p.m. I told him I had to go home now if I wanted to make it home on time. It was around 7:30 at the moment, but I wanted to stop by a friend's house before I went home. He told me he could give me a ride home so we could have another cup of coffee. But I wasn't too keen on taking him up on his offer, but I soon convinced myself that it was harmless. I decided that I would go see my friend tomorrow and visit the old man. I should also add I told him my curfew was 9. I said that so that I could go hang out with my friend without him feeling like I was ditching him. I stayed to chat a little longer, and then he said he would drive me home. At this point, I almost felt obligated. If I told him I'd catch the bus, he would know that I would either be late for my curfew or that I was lying to cut the visit short. "My car is parked only a block from here. I'll get you home in no time," he said with a smile. I was a little creeped out by this point, but he still just seemed like a friendly old man, a little too friendly. We climbed into his car and I started to give him directions, with the intention of having him dropping me off a few blocks from my home, so he didn't actually know where I lived. I told him to turn right, but then he didn't. "Oh, it was that way," I said, trying not to sound worried. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, in a sweet old man's voice. "Can you still get me to your house from here?" I was trying to keep it cool, and I replied, "Yeah, and 2 blocks at the next stoplight, turn left." I made sure there would be no way he would miss it this time. Before we got to the stoplight, he got onto the on-ramp to get onto the freeway. By this time, I was freaking out. "This is not the way to my house. Where are you going?" I demanded, too mad to be scared. His voice then went from sweet old man to a very strong and stern one. "Relax, baby. I thought we could stop by the motel first. I've something I want to give you." I tried to be cool while planning my next move. "Where is your motel?" He smiled. "Only a few miles from here. I'll get you home before curfew, don't you worry." He kept driving and driving, saying it was just a little further. I realized we were almost in the next big town, which was 45 minutes away from where we were on the freeway. I was shaking, trying to stay cool as if I had no idea that this was a bad situation. He stopped at this little shabby motel and directed me to his room. He had the door open and was pushing me in before I could even start running. We got inside and he closed the door. "Oh, don't worry, I just want some company. I'll get you dinner and we'll go to a movie or something. Here, baby, have a drink." He said it demandingly again. I declined the drink when he got nose to nose with me and told me that I need to relax and have a drink. I took the drink and pretended to drink it. Then he just sat on the bed and stared at me as if he was waiting. Before I knew it, it was 9:30. "I need to go home now," I said, looking him straight in the eye. He looked a bit irritated, but seemed as if he was trying to keep his cool. "All right, I'll call you a cab if you do one thing for me." I glared at him, knowing what he was implying. "I have a boyfriend. I told you that." Not to mention this guy was older than my grandpa. Ah, come on. He doesn't have to know. "You need to call that cab right now," I said. He rolled his eyes and took the motel phone. He opened the yellow book and started to dial a number. He waited for a moment and said, "Hello, I need a cab to... How much would it cost to take it to... All right, thank you, bye." Then he hung up. "It'll be here in 20, he said. My face felt cold. and then I heard the other side of the line on the phone saying, before it was back on the hook, "I'm sorry, your call could not be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try your call again. This is a recording." He was lying. At this point, I was in a mixture between fight and flight, and I called him out on it. "You must think you're pretty smart, don't you? I could hear the call, and I'm leaving." I started to walk to the door, but he stood in front of me. I looked straight into his eyes, and I said, "Move." He smiled sheepishly and said, "Okay, I have to pay to make a call on these phones. I'll give you a ride to the next store, and you can call a cab from there, okay?" He digs into his pockets and hands me $60. This should cover the cost of the cab. Just take it and I'll give you a ride." He pushed the money into my hand, then led me by the arm into his car, pretty roughly. He seemed upset, disappointed. As he started the car, I made very close observations of his movements, ready to clock him in the face if he moved wrong. Then I began to notice this thing he kept doing, where he'd crouch down and reach his hand under the seat. At first, I thought he was scratching his ankle, but then realized that that wasn't what he was doing. He was looking for something under the seat. I steadily leaned forward and lowered myself to try to check under the seat to see if there was anything I could use as a weapon, just in case he found what he was looking for. I didn't have to rummage very far before I found a crowbar. I grabbed it, and it clinked on the seat as I pulled it out. He heard it. He stopped moving and sat stiff, as if I found what he was looking for. I held it in my lap, out in the open for him to see. By then, I was ready to go psycho and scare the living crap out of him. He did a U-turn and began heading back to the lights of the town. I realized I'd gotten control of the situation, and that he had been planning something terrible the entire time. I glanced back for a second to catch a glimpse of plastic, lots of plastic, glinting in the back seat when we drove under a street lamp. I remember swallowing hard and thinking, I need to make him scared of me for sure. I looked at him, trying to give him the scariest smile I could muster, and said, "Bet you'd be dead from one swing of this thing." Then I demanded from him, "Just drop me off right here." He braked so hard I almost dropped my crowbar. We were in front of a well-lit gas station. I got out quickly, still holding the crowbar, and I waved goodbye with it in my hand, still trying to maintain my creepy look. Then he sped away. I watched until he was gone and out of sight. Once he was, I started to cry. I broke down right then and there, feeling numb and sick and depressed. I didn't even realize I still had the crowbar in my hand at the time. I startled the shopkeeper when I walked in, but I quickly dropped it, and I told her everything. As soon as I sat down, I realized that I still had the money the old man gave me. I thought about it, and pretty sure he wasn't planning on letting me keep it. The shopkeeper called the cops, and I got a ride home from them. I remember staying in my room the entire weekend, not even sleeping a wink, and crying more than I ever had before in my life. Nevertheless, I survived that situation, no matter how horrible a plan the old man had for me. I'm proud of myself and simultaneously disgusted. Number 4. Gone in the Woods, submitted by JGD. It was on July 3rd, 2016. It was the Sunday before Independence Day. I was with 2 friends, David and Raymond. This story took place in the forest of Grayling, Michigan, then at a nearby hotel. Dave is the oldest of us at 18. Ray and I are 16. I stand 6'5" and weigh nearly 300 pounds, and I look a lot older than I am. We're all friends from school, and we can usually lie or bullcrap our way out of problems, but not this time. We enjoy playing airsoft, and we brought our equipment up there to mess around with. We had lied to our parents and said we were crashing at a friend's place, when we had actually ran up north to Grayling. We arrived after 4 hours on the road in Dave's beat-up old 73 Chevy 4x4, one of his dad's hand-me-downs. We set up our tents in the backwoods by a pond, a place me and my dad call the crap hole, due to its pungent aroma and general appearance. We ended up just screwing around nearby until the sun went down. Then we started a campfire, threw a few big logs in it and ate some MREs we had brought. We started the truck and started blasting the radio, specifically Dwight Yoakam, until midnight. That's when we started an airsoft game. We got dressed up in our gear and headed in 3 different directions. After a few minutes of hiking away from one another, we got on our walkie-talkies and agreed it was go time. Just to set the scene, I'm wearing a GPS gas mask and wearing black cargo pants and a black t-shirt, a bandolier made of duct tape running around the forest, talking to myself in barely coherent Russian. Probably just nonsense I'd learned from a combination of Rosetta Stone and Call of Duty games. After maybe 15 minutes, I ran up on our campsite and found Dave and Ray standing there. "What's wrong? I thought we were playing," I asked. Then Ray answers, "Dude, somebody went through our stuff. Check your bag, see if anything's missing." I did. My cell phone, video camera, and all my money was gone. I was mad. I had at least $2,000 worth of stuff, stolen by some backwoods redneck. They'd even smashed in one of the windows on Dave's truck, sending him into a flurry of curses. We figured that whoever stole and smashed our stuff was gone now, but we decided to go ahead and get out of there. We were packing up our last tent when we heard some rustling in the brush about 20 feet away from us, a few twigs snapping. We ripped the tent stakes right out of the ground and threw them in the truck bed, then dumped out a bucket of water onto the fire, just as we heard someone scream, "You're not getting away," followed by some very choice words. We hauled tail out of there. Dave and Ray had hopped into the cab, while I was in the bed. As we sped off, he just kept shouting a bunch of insensitive slurs. We drove into town and stayed at a motel. None of us slept that night. It was hard to sleep, because we heard someone outside at the truck. We couldn't make out what they were saying from our motel room, but they sounded angry. I think it was the man. He had followed us to the motel. Eventually, it was morning, and the angry man sounded like he was gone. We checked outside and saw nothing unusual. We left the motel room and went to the truck, and it had been keyed. A bunch of terrible slurs and curses had been keyed into the truck. The man had also taken the liberty of smashing in the window and returning my camera and Ray's phone. "Watch this" had been sharpied on the side. Now, my expensive camera had a low light visibility mode, just black and white night vision. The sicko had recorded himself, touching himself, as he watched us from a tree, hurriedly racing off from our campsite. He had dropped the camera to run at us as we were leaving. He goes back and picks it up. It cuts to black for a moment, then it comes back on. He's standing just outside of our motel, having spotted our truck and muttering more obscenities. He scratched up the truck with a screwdriver while laughing his backwoods butt off. Then he walked up to a motel room door, our door, and opened it, because apparently the door hadn't locked right. But luckily for us, he just laughed, then ran off. Of course, after leaving the stuff in our truck, and leaving us a very rude and unwelcome goodbye. After seeing all that, and because we had lied about where we were, and I felt more in trouble and guilty than angry, I ended up burning that camera to hide all evidence that we were there. I know better now, but I didn't back then. When we arrived back home, we admitted nothing. We said that we had been staying at each other's houses. As for the window and the missing electronics, we said the truck had been broken into and things were stolen. We were living in Midtown Detroit, so the lie was easily believed. Be careful when you travel into the middle of the woods. Don't lie to your parents about where you're going. Even if you did lie, and you end up in this kind of situation, Don't be afraid to come clean to your parents, because now that psycho is still out there. Who knows what he'll do if more kids enter his woods. And number 5, the worst room service, submitted by James Y. This story happened to my girlfriend, and it comes from her point of view. In 2005, my family went to the SEC basketball tournament in Birmingham, Alabama. Because of so many fans showing up for the game, all the good hotels and decent motels were sold out, so my family had to stay at an off-brand seedy-looking motel or travelodge. The door to their room wasn't secure, the phone was two-toned black and white, the TV only had one channel, and you could barely tell Three's Company was on. At one point I had used the restroom, so I went to the bathroom and noticed the toilet top wasn't even on it. And by toilet top I don't mean the seat, I mean the lid over the water tank in the back. I ignored it, rolled my eyes, and did my business. The rest of the room was just as messed up anyway. My dad was out trying to find tickets to the basketball games, and I decided to take a nap. I was awakened by a knock at the door. I guess the door didn't have a peephole because my older sister asked, who is it?" The reply was, "Room service." I guess either my sister or my mom opened the door and I heard them slam the door shut right after opening it. Then they went hysterical, screaming, "Oh my God," repeatedly. The knock on the door had partly woke me up, but now their shouting was making me completely lucid. I asked them what was going on, and they said there was a scruffy-looking guy holding the lid to the toilet outside, using it upside down as an ashtray. They said he had tried to force himself in, and even better was what appeared to be a toy in his left hand. A dirty, unwashed grown-up toy. I was disgusted just hearing it. They pushed chairs up against the door until my dad got back. By then, the man was gone, and we changed motels. I don't know what he was going to do with that. Maybe he was just out of his mind, or maybe he really did plan on doing something to us. Either way, I won't be back to that motel. If you've got nowhere to stay, you go to a hotel. If you can't afford a hotel, you go to a motel. But if you're desperate and you value your life, you live the rest of your life in a cardboard box, as it's much safer and more romantic than a grimy old motel. Those were the good old days. Anyway, whenever you crash at a place that is not your home, you run the risk of bumping into strangers, some of them just awkward, but there are a few that want to make your life a living nightmare. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you want your story in a future video, I'm looking for scary stories from Toys R Us. Send yours to me at darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support this channel, you can do so for free by downloading my free app Spooked on the Google Play Store, or donate just $1 a month at patreon.com/darknessprevails, and you'll get your name in the credits at the end of a video. If you do have some extra cash, go to morbidmonsters.com for t-shirts, mugs, and more, all Darkness Prevails themed. As always, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, about 10 true ghost stories from Asia. Michael Myler says, "When I die, I'm haunting Daddy Darkness. Well, I gladly welcome you to the spooky posse." Skaterboy Sweet 666 says, "Make a scary story video on gentlemen's clubs. Like, come on, it would be good. No worries, I will when I get back from my, field research." Sweetheart Sonia says, "Don't you just hate it when you're traveling in Asia, but some lady with a surgical mask keeps trying to slit your face open? Or is it just me?" Sonia, the bigger the mouth, the better. Night Darkhound says, "The most common crime in Asia is identity fraud. Well, I've been wanting to disappear for a while. If I sound different next week, don't worry about it." And Zane Samard Moore says, The scary thing about this is that I just came back from Japan, and I was terrified when some old Japanese man said to me, "No, those aren't just urban legends. Some are more fact than fiction." Japan is one of the coolest cultures, yet has some of the creepiest urban legends. You've got that right. Sometimes I want to learn the language, just to get in on the horror and anime scene. Thank you all so much for sticking around to the end. Here are the credits for my patrons who have donated and helped this channel with a little extra. To all of you still listening, stay safe out there and stay creepy.